most of your old maids and Jews did not die. What do old maids tend to have around their house, their dwelling place? Anybody know? What do old maids have a lot of time? Cats. And I had a few. What do the cats do? The flea that carried the flea that carried the disease, the virus that caused the Black Death, this flea lived on the black rat. What good did the cats do? It kept the rats away. Now, here's something I've just learned the last couple of years. You can look it up for yourself. Pope Gregory VII decreed that cats were of the devil and should be killed. Two types of people did not kill their cats. The old maids were not going to kill theirs, Pope or no Pope. They didn't kill their cats. And the Jews, they were not bound by the authority of the Pope. The Jews did not kill their cats. The result, the old maids were called witches, and so were the Jews, and both sides were persecuted. In the 1600s, there came another Black Death. Another cooling. In the 60s, there came another cooling. Old maids did not die off as much as other people. They were called witches. Well, here's what your book says about the old maids. People before this time could support them, so they'd feed them. But then, when hard times hit economically, nobody had spare food, so the old maids had to resort to selling potions, cures for colds. So they would go out in the woods and pull up roots, mix up potions which they'd sell to cure colds and cure arthritis and kill pain. Some of these medicines, by the way, actually worked a little bit. But they were called witches, and a lot of them were burned at the stake for witchcraft. In the late 1600s, in the United States, there occurred the Salem witchcraft trials. Now, remember, I'm the father of two young girls myself, so here's the story. These girls living in Salem, New England, were not allowed to play with dolls because this was a form of idolatry. They were not allowed to dress in brightly colored clothes. They were not allowed to sit around and tell stories. This would lead to worldliness. They were not allowed to put on or watch puppet shows. They were not allowed to do a lot of the things that young girls like to do. They had all this pent-up feminine energy. And finally, one day, a bunch of them decided, well, there was a black slave among them who went and talked to the Indians. And the Indians might have taught this to her, and she taught it to them. But these girls started acting like they're under the spell of witches, and then they started blaming the men and the women of the town. And 21 people were hung for witchcraft, executed, before the girls finally wrote a written confession that it had all been faked. This occurred in Salem. There is no town of Salem anymore. It became a ghost town. The people there left. But this was his worst case. But eventually the people caught on. Hey, this witchcraft craze is just a hysteria. We've got to stop it. Again, most of the women tried for witchcraft were old and unmarried. And they were forced into it. And they were often tortured. Under torture, people will confess to anything. But as time went on, the witchcraft craze stopped. All right. Which brings us up to absolutism. But now most of the religious fervor had died down, and we're getting into state building. I've already mentioned, in the case of France, the most strongest example of absolutism was Louis XIV. Absolutism means the king is the government. He has all power. Nobody can question him. He has the final say-so in everything. Louis XIV of France got the throne as a boy of 4 years old. All right, got the throne as a boy of 4. And he grew up, and he started taking over everything to make sure he was in power. When it came time to appoint government offices, He would bypass the old nobility and appoint his own men who were loyal to him. He insisted that every document that was signed had to be signed by him. So he would sign papers while eating his meals. He would even sign papers in his bathtub. He took a bath about once a year. I mean, this was typical, it's still typical of Europeans, at least was when I was a young man. I don't know if it is or not. He didn't take very many baths, even though he was king. But he would sign papers in his bathtub. He would sign papers while eating. He was signing papers all the time because he insisted on getting involved even in the most trivial of matters. But he insisted he was the absolute ruler. He's called the Sun King, among other things. Now, he kept a standing army. This is going to become very important because before this time, kings would call up armies when they needed them. Then after that, they send their troops home when the wars were over. Well, he had an army by his side all the time called a standing army, which he paid for out of the royal treasury. He engaged in 5 wars and lost most of them, but he was at war almost constantly. He lived a life of luxury. Now, he built the palace at Versailles. We'll talk more about it later. The Treaty of Versailles ended World War I, by the way. But the Palace of Versailles was the most magnificent palace in Europe, except for maybe the Kremlin, that had been built by one of the Russian czars. But he built a magnificent palace, and the other kings would try to keep up with him, keep up with the Bourbons. He was a member of the Bourbon dynasty, or keep up with King Louis. He ruled for some 70 years. His wars and his luxury put his people into poverty. He told himself, as he was ruling, that, well, I know I'm taxing my people too hard, but when I get what I want, I'll quit taxing. But he never got what he wanted. He got to be in his early 70s and found himself on his deathbed unexpectedly. I mean, he thought he was going to live a good while longer, but all of a sudden he was on his deathbed. It has been said he called his 5-year-old successor by his side. He'd outlived his son, he outlived his grandson, outlived his first great-grandson, but his second great-grandson was 5 years old, and he called him and said, "My son, don't do as I have done, don't be as I have been." The advice fell on deaf ears. When Louis XV grew up, he was even more extravagant than Louis XIV had been. Anyway, he set himself absolute. This was why, when the United States was formed, we decided we would not have a king. We would not have nobility. We would elect our officials, and in general, we've not elected a father and a son. There have been a few exceptions. But these two kings, Louis XIV, Louis XV, left France impoverished and left France with enemies on all sides.